Hello and welcome to season 3 of SustainAPod, the youth-led podcast for young people and anyone interested in exploring the world of sustainability. My name is Belinda, and this episode is hosted alongside my lovely co-host, Kadence.
Yep, my name is Kadence, and we're so happy today to have Stephanie with us. Stephanie founded Body Banter in 2016 after realizing the powerful role that discussion and advocacy played in her own eating disorder recovery journey. So her work has been featured on media platforms including BBC, Channel News Asia, and Now TV, and she's just an awe-inspiring person. We also have Deeya with us, who is a student Body Banter ambassador and also our lovely SustainAPod outreach member. So let's jump straight into it. First of all, for Stephanie, what inspired you to start Body Banter, and can you talk more about what Body Banter does?
Yeah, wonderful. I'm so excited to be on SustainAPod. First of all, thank you for having me, Belinda, Kadence, and Deeya. It's an honor, and I'm really thrilled to have this conversation. So, woo! Okay. So what inspired me to start Body Banter? That's a great question. And I always start by sharing an anecdote of how the idea came to me. It was actually while I was on vacation in Japan, and I remember waking up from a dream. And this dream was, it was kind of like I was on a TEDx stage and I was giving a speech. And basically what happened was there was this stream of words that was coming out of my mouth, and I could actually see the words coming out of my mouth in a visual way. And I remember just standing on that stage and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this is so messy. Like there's so much stuff coming out of my mouth. It looks like word barf. Like if you've ever seen the image of like a gnome barfing rainbows or something. That's kind of how I felt in that moment. So it was a very surreal dream. But I woke up remembering and actually realizing something very important about the ways that we converse and the ways that we share our narratives. Because what happened in the dream was that despite being very messy with the way I spoke, despite barfing rainbows, everyone in the audience was actually very receptive to what I had to say. And everyone else in the audience actually also started to barf rainbows. And so there was some kind of solidarity even in that messiness. And that's something that, I think was planted in my brain space at the time. And I just came to a realization that, yes, we all have our messy narratives to share. And yet there is something that is very human about that. And conversations are kind of that way that we can tie together all of those narratives. And I think about it as standing strong in the solidarity of the struggles that we share. And so in terms of starting Body Banter, I'm very much inspired by my own experience, the ways that I started to, as you said, discover the power of conversations throughout my recovery from the eating disorder. During my teens, I was, as you can probably relate to, the teens, kind of the preteens to the teens to the young adult period is really messy and very turbulent. Lots of changes and transitions in terms of social circles and also just academic stressors. There's just so much change. And so the way that I coped with my reality was to try to make it a little neater and more predictable. And that's how I started to develop disordered eating patterns as a way to latch onto something that felt stable and concrete and tangible. And that meant controlling my weight, controlling the way my body looked. And that worked for a while. I always say that it worked for a while, and that's why it felt like a survival mechanism. And then slowly it turned into something that was more and more, it started to spiral into something that I couldn't quite handle anymore. And what I was hanging on to was the addictive feeling of control rather than the aspect of like, what does my body look like at this point? And, I always think about it as, in the darkest days of the disorder, you stop thinking even about appearance-based traits and things that are based on appearance. And that's not something that people anticipate when they hear about eating disorders, because there's always a misconception that it is to do with that obsession with appearance, but it's actually an obsession with control and actually wanting to feel safe in the face of things that feel very uncontrollable and unpredictable. And so with Body Banter, that was kind of in the initial stages, very much just a way that I wanted to explore how other people were experiencing their messy experiences as well. So it was very like a self-reflective, self-motivated kind of exploration, I would say, for reasons that I was just curious, to be frank. And so Body Banter was founded as an online platform. We were basically a Squarespace site. At the beginning, we were a Squarespace site. And I asked my friends and friends of friends afterwards, to share their stories and their perspectives. And I just wanted to know how people narrated their stories about body image and mental health. And then from there, after I established the online version of Body Banter, I went to college in the US. And then I believe it was my third year of college, I started an in-person discussion group on campus. And that was where, another form of magic happened, because when you have in-person discussions, there is something about that where people start to open up in a very particular way, and there's sharing, there's connection. And so I realized that there were different mediums through which we could explore our stories and do that collectively as well. So that's kind of the way that Body Banter started to develop into just exploring different mediums of expression as well, and starting to establish those in-person pockets of discussion. And then, I always think about Body Banter as developing very organically. Nothing really was planned. Conversations started to take shape. People started to hang on to, we started to build community. And to this day, I think that Body Banter is the community. It's just the way that people expand upon the first things what they bring into the conversation and what they want to create. It's all up to the imagination and the ability to construct new things from our community members. And yeah, so that is a big circle of an explanation.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's really incredible to hear how, it started with just a Squarespace site, and then it has become something that has really impacted on so many high school students, especially in Hong Kong, through your different workshops and different sessions. And I agree definitely that it is such a personal thing, and everyone relates to, be it disordered eating patterns and body image in such a different way, that having a platform to talk about it is actually so powerful in that sense, because it can feel quite isolating in the moment. It's a very individual thing. So yeah, that's really, really amazing. And during this process, I know you did mention that it was quite organic. Were there kind of any main challenges that you encountered, or unexpected things that kind of arose in the process, and how did you overcome?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that, Belinda, and definitely a very interesting process of developing and growing beyond the initial Squarespace site. I think initially when we started to, branch out into school clubs, especially as it started to branch out into kind of school clubs that were beyond my school. So because I started it as a discussion group in the college I was at, and then, other people started to be like, oh, so can we establish these at our schools as well? There was just that, I think, the logistical aspect, administrative aspect of building Body Banter was the more complex side, and this is still something I struggle with all the time, because with the community-based aspect and trying to balance that community-based aspect and trying to give some structure to the organization, that's probably the biggest challenge that I have faced with that. And it's sometimes hard because I know that I want people to have flexibility with the ways that they develop their ideas within Body Banter and how they explore things in their own capacities. And also, I know that especially with conversation communities, which are the discussion groups we establish at different schools, I know that with sensitive topics like body image and mental health, it's particularly important that we provide structure. And so there's this balance that I need to think about. Now we have these standardized discussion templates that people can refer to, and we make sure to check in with our ambassadors to see how they are doing with their discussions, but then also give them a more free reign over, or creative agency over, particular topics. And, just as long as we can come to an agreement as to how to tackle a topic more sensitively, then we do that. But this was something that I had to learn along the way, because early on, I was kind of like, yeah, just talk about whatever you want to talk about. And that did not work well.
Yep, thanks for sharing your experience. And yeah, like I definitely agree. Like expansion is definitely a problem, and you have to like provide some structure, else everyone goes like blah, 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 blah. So
Yeah,
that obviously doesn't
exactly
work.
that.
Yeah. So obviously you talked about expansion a little bit, but like, do you have any like next plans or goals for Body Banter? Because I know you guys do a lot of great stuff already, but are you planning to like perhaps do even more, or are you planning to just like consolidate your current programs? What are your new plans for 2022 and beyond?
Woo, excited for that. And I think we have had these, we had actually had some exciting ideas for how to grow Body Banter. And I think COVID did make it a little bit more difficult to do that this year. We did actually want to do a few more in-person gatherings and bring our community together, especially with in Hong Kong. And I know in Deeya, currently we're on a we're on a Zoom call for those of you who are listening. And Deeya's nodding because we actually had some great in-person gatherings back when COVID wasn't quite as severe as it is right now. And we were able to create some intern gatherings and ambassador gatherings and just get the community together within Hong Kong. But, we do what we can now, hopefully we can maybe do a Zoom gathering at some point. And we try to keep the community together over Discord. So Discord is a chat platform. For those of you who are not familiar, it's like it has channels for different conversation topics. And we're just able to communicate with our community that way. But, going back to the idea of other next plans for Body Banter, I would really like to see more localized content. Since we are now based in Hong Kong, I'd like to get some Chinese content out there and to see how we can bring in more, just make our platform more inclusive and, linguistically and culturally. And then also just thinking about, I always say, COVID allowing, hopefully having more interactive exhibitions and activities and seeing how we can bring in the broader community in an in-person way, because I just know that there is something about in-person gatherings and connecting in person that makes something more impactful. And then as Cadence was asking, I think we are also looking to just solidify what we have, reaching out to more schools, doing more talks and doing that consistently, and then working on structuring and just making our advocacy mentorship program for youth and also just our overall organization a little bit more structured and also flexible at the same time. So bringing in the community, making sure everyone feels like they have a role and feels important and knows that their work is valued. So that's something I want to work on for our organization this year.
That's very, very important stuff. And I love the way that you've really broken it down and really made it very people centric. Like the organization is ultimately the people, and
It
really
is.
making
Yeah.
everyone feel that inclusion is really important. And so, yeah, I'd like to bring Deeya in here. Obviously, you've been doing a lot of really great work as an ambassador. So could you share with us more about your initial motivations for being an ambassador? And also, could you share anything maybe that you've learned about yourself in the process of being an ambassador?
Of course. So initially, I was very in awe with like the Body Banter mission because I felt like having these mindful conversations about issues like mental health and body image are very valuable, especially when you're like kind of my age, like you're kind of young, and this type of guidance is so valuable because we live in an era where you're constantly exposed to these like unrealistic beauty standards on social media. It's like the first thing you see when you open your screen. And so getting this type of guidance early on, I think is just really beneficial for like mental well-being so you don't end up harming yourself physically or mentally. And because of this, I joined to help those with a negative body perception of themselves and providing them with sort of the stepping stones to being open about their insecurities and understanding how doing so can actually help foster and build their self-esteem so you get more comfortable with yourself. And this is something that I learned through my journey of being a Bant ambassador. I definitely learned more about my boundaries and who I am as a person, like what I feel comfortable with and what I don't feel comfortable with, and how to sort of healthily like enforce a boundary. And also just knowing the basic fundamentals and key concepts of healthily talking about body image, because it's also very important. So you have to be mindful, like thoughtful talking so you don't end up offending anyone or really creating an open space so everyone feels comfortable, and just reinforcing the fact that you are allowed to only talk about things to the extent that you're comfortable with. And this is something that I've definitely learned and been exposed to since being a Bant ambassador. Like any survey or like discussion I've seen or been a part of with Body Banter, that's one of the most prominent things I've noticed, and I very much appreciate that. Yeah, so I'm very grateful for all of this. In terms of like projects or starting initiatives within Body Banter, I have learned like the possibilities are endless. You can do anything you want to do, just plan, talk to staff, talk to like any of the other head team members, and they will help you make it happen. And that is just amazing. Like, oh my God, it's the best thing ever. And it's really inspiring. So you also stay motivated. And that's really makes you feel very connected with the Body Banter family.
Honestly, Deeya, that's so inspiring. And I'm glad that you shared like your part of the story. And honestly, yeah, sharing stories about like, your body image and also like making sure that people are comfortable and it's a safe space is like especially important. I know like this question can be directed at either of you because I know both of you have experience in this area, but how should we talk to someone struggling with body image? Perhaps Stephanie can start first.
Yeah, thanks, Cadence, and thank you for sharing that, Deeya. You very literally brought tears to my eyes, and I'm honored to hear, and so thrilled to hear that there was something that you felt like Body Banter was something that was supportive to you, and I feel the very same way about you joining us and just the ways that you've contributed to Body Banter so far, and I'm excited for where we're going to go going forward. But yes, I'll speak a little bit to the topic of how to speak to someone who might be struggling with their body image or their eating. And Deeya, definitely feel free to jump in wherever. So I have a couple of things that I just kind of keep at the forefront of my mind in terms of talking about this topic. I think the first thing is to see their whole person first. I think a lot of times when you think about someone who might be struggling with any mental health problem, there's this tendency to be like, oh, this is something that is almost encompassing their whole being, like I need to tiptoe around it almost, or there's this spotlight effect almost that this person is just their mental illness or only represents this category. And so I think the first thing to do is to treat them like they're a whole person, to show them that you value them as they are, regardless of any thing that they might be struggling with, or perhaps what physical state they're in. So for example, something that was very helpful for me personally when I was coming out of the eating disorder was that my friends would invite me to dinner consistently, no matter how many times I would say no. So they would be like, Steph, it matters that you're coming. We're getting dinner tonight. If you want to come along, please do. So they would consistently ask me to go to dinner, even if that was, they kind of knew actually that I would probably say no. And I did say no for the first perhaps 20 times. But then the 21st time I was like, well, yeah, I'll bring a snack afterwards. And, maybe that's something I'm not 100% comfortable with yet, but then I feel so valued. And so I feel like you're seeing me as a whole. And so I think that was something that was personally helpful. And I think is just helpful in general for the person. And, this extends beyond eating context. So telling the friend that they matter to you, for example, giving them kind of validation and compliments that show them that you see them as a whole person. So like, you bring such joy to my life, you bring such sparkle, energy. Your energy is so lovely. There's a lot of ways to validate the person beyond praising them for perhaps like eating more today or, praising them for putting on some weight if you're in a kind of a weight restoration process of an eating disorder, for example. So there are a lot of ways you can show the person that they're valued beyond just the eating behaviors or the physical appearance aspects of recovery. And then the second thing that I kind of think about is just to ask the person what they need and to be an open place and non-judgmental place for conversation and to be someone to listen to them, but also respecting their boundaries along that process. So kind of being prepared to listen to what they have to say and giving them that space, but then not pushing them. So there is a tendency to be like, oh, but what do you really feel? It's like there has to be more. and this all comes out of good intention. And a lot of things, just I acknowledge, along the journey, it's really hard to tell what is the best way to support someone. Even as a person supporting someone else, you will slip up, and that is fine. I think everyone has their learning process, including people who are supporting others. But just, keeping in mind that this person is also working through things, you're also working through things. And I think ultimately just giving yourself grace and the person as well. So yeah, that's kind of what the two things that I keep in mind when supporting someone and what helped me feel supported as well. Yeah, anything to add?
Of course. Also, I feel like just understanding that the journey to finding self-love and gaining confidence has its highs and lows. And
Mm,
especially during like seasons where there are like holidays and big feasts and things. And so having this sort of like understanding already puts you one step closer into a mindset where you're going to be sort of more approachable to a person. And with that, just again, like not forcing anything out of them. If they do decide to tell you about their struggles, don't force anything out of them. Just listen first and just remind them that there's no pressure to overshare anything. But also having this sort of universal behavior is useful because you never know who's struggling with body image. And so if you decide to act this way with one person who you definitely know has even just a mental health issue in general, if you act like this specifically with them, but sort of act differently with other people, that might hinder the ability to sort of create a safe environment because those people who are having the same issues but aren't necessarily explicitly displaying it may feel sort of discouraged to open up and they might feel like they're not worthy enough of opening about their problems and having the necessary help to solve them or overcome their issues. And going back to what Steph said, not really counter question the others in terms of what do you really feel? Just listen to them and understand them for who they are and just show them that they deserve to be loved. Their body deserves to be loved. Who you are as a person deserves to be loved no matter what. And there are people there for you.
That was very, very insightful. Thank you both for that. I recently actually came across a quote on social media. Ironically, I know we talk a lot about how social media perpetuates body image challenges and struggles, but it was very simple. It just said like, your weight is the least interesting thing about you. And I was like, yeah, that really hit me. I was like, yeah, that is so true. And there is this obsession, sometimes when when you are in that little hole where you are in that, be it with disordered eating pattern or something, that like you just it becomes very obsessive, as Stephanie you mentioned, like with the idea of control. And it's like, no, like it's not at all. And like focusing on the whole person, which is why I thought that is so important. I want to shift the topic a little bit now to talk more about more context specific ideas of body image. Obviously it's not something that's, like typically when you think about eating disorders, you think about maybe like a young girl, but of course that's not the case. The body image challenges manifest differently across genders, across like cultural context. So could you share more about how, maybe if there's anything specific about the way that body image struggles can occur in maybe the Hong Kong context and also maybe across different genders as well, if there's any experiences or insights? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up, Belinda, because I think there is this misconception that it's like a young white girl, privileged individual's problem. And there's a lot of like, just discussion about the stereotypical view of what a person with an eating disorder looks like. And, the first thing that does come to mind is that this really affects, first of all, help-seeking behaviors, because if there is a certain way that eating disorders are supposed to look, then people who don't fit into that stereotype don't think that they deserve help. And it's like, oh, but I don't look like the person who is portrayed as struggling, or I'm not sick enough yet. So I hear this a lot actually in terms of like, I don't deserve help. And I think that's one of the bigger implications when it comes to having these stereotypes about body image and about struggling with an eating disorder. Okay, so that was my mini segue. But going back into the way that body image struggles can occur in the Hong Kong context and what factors can kind of make it more salient or make these issues happen in particular ways. So an interesting thing that some research has gone into, and I'm sure all of you here can relate to, is that we have this very fast-paced societal environment that really makes us want to do things effectively and efficiently. So we always want to do things, we want to get shortcuts to doing things and make things happen as quickly as possible. So what we see here is that we have a lot of diet pill usage, and we have a lot of ways that we want to show and perform that we're doing well or that we're disciplined, and we want to outwardly display those traits. So how this links to things like body image is that a lot of times we'll want to, those before and after photos, we want to get to that after state as quickly as possible. And we don't think about all the kind of the things that are going on in between. And we just want to show, we want to perform that ultimate state of being. And so this kind of comes to a place where we lose sight of those emotional consequences of how changing our behaviors surrounding food and exercise can affect our psychological states. So that's just one of the ways that, the societal atmosphere that Hong Kong has may facilitate or kind of like contribute to exacerbated or very particular ways that we might struggle with food and body. And then another thing that you all also might have noticed is there is this very narrow standard for what the ideal body looks like. And, you might hear about how, so some of my friends who have come over from the UK or the US will comment on how it takes so much more. You have to be so much smaller in the Hong Kong context to be considered in an ideal shape. And if you kind of have too much variation, I put too much in quotes. If you have too much variation in the way that your body looks, in terms of like if you're a bit too muscular, quote unquote, too muscular, or even if you are quote unquote too thin, like there is a very narrow margin of perfection that occurs within the body image space in Hong Kong. And a lot of times I think about how this particular image is very, very photoshopped, because this is the way that a lot of the images are portrayed in our MTR stations on TV. And, there are people who are genetically blessed in that particular way to look like that. But I think that very narrow standard makes it very difficult for anyone to feel like they can fit in to this ideal. And these narrow standards also make it a very normalized phenomenon for many of us to feel very dissatisfied with our bodies. So that's a second way in which like our environment in Hong Kong can really shape our body and our relationship with body and food. And then just a final way is that you might have noticed in a lot of family gatherings or social gatherings, it's very normalized to speak about bodies and food in a very explicit and often not very pleasant way. So this is often seen as a sign of care. I know that in most situations, it is intended to be a sign of care. I'm not doubting the intention, but I do think that when it is mixed with this environment of very overt concern and just the ways that, as you've seen, we've linked appearance with the ways that we are, like our morality, people that we are, when you're mixing that with social media factors and just this fast-paced societal environment, plus people pulling out, constantly commenting on your body and your eating behaviors and facilitating these self-surveillance and excessive body monitoring behavior, like kind of tendencies in yourself, then you put that all together and it is a perfect storm for body dissatisfaction and a poor relationship with food. So that all comes together to shape. Also, I know that the time is running out and we have not even grazed the surface of the gender, and so let's hop on to the next and then we'll talk about that part.
There's so much to unpack still, so keep listening on part 2 of our conversation with Stephanie and Deeya from Body Banter. As always, we would love to hear from you about this episode. So let us know if you have any questions and comments by messaging us on Instagram at sustainapod_GIH or email us at sustainapod@gmail.com. See you next time.